Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR Companion Up and Running series, and this video is about producing basic tables in the QPSMR Companion. So we're not going to cover some of the more difficult things, but let's look at all the sort of basic types of things you need to do when you're preparing tables. So we have a project here which you can see starts with a couple of demographics running down to question 15, and it's also got already prepared a variable which has some analysis banners in it. So if we quickly have a look at that, you can see it has gender, region and country USA and not USA. So we have a sort of standard banner we might use on many or several of our tables. Now if you don't know how to build variables, you'll need to watch the video that takes you through setting up variables in the Companion. Alright, so I'm going to save this now and I'm going to go to the analysis part of the program. And I'm going to start with something very simple first of all. I'm going to look at a summary setup of tables that you can produce almost automatically. So let's do that first so we can get some quick figures. I'm going to click on this. It's defaulting to top line. We're going to leave it as top line. And you can see it's produced a table pretty much of every single question on our questionnaire here. And if I run that and click OK, I can automatically just get these tables, and I can click on, for example, region here, and I can see that the split of respondents is 326, 313, 1191, and there's the percentages for each of those categories of respondents. So that's a quick way of getting some really quick counts in total, perhaps to see where you're starting. But more commonly, you actually want to start building your own crosstabs, perhaps starting with every question by a standard banner or some questions by a standard banner, then perhaps producing some tables that are filtered and so on. So we're going to look a little bit deeper now and see how we go about that. So I'm going into the analysis part of the program. I'm going to make my own tables file here. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to call this my_tables. And you can see now I've got a sort of work area where I can specify my tables. And most of this is fairly intuitive. Table name, a title, a footnote, a column you want, the row you want, whether you want a filter, and the formats. And you can use the filters applying to these questions if you want to, or you can just base them on everybody if you wish to, or the filter that you actually have on your table. So these are sort of like additional filters that are applied to anybody answering that particular question. So I can start using these icons here. I can either use the tables menu, and I can use the add tables next to it. So tables menu here lets me copy and paste. I've got nothing to copy and paste. I can move tables up and down the list here, or I can add tables. And the most common thing you're going to be doing probably is having standard tables. And if I want to add a standard table, I can do that, although it's much more common to click on these icons here, because the 5 icons here, there's add a table, add some syntax, so you can get into the MRDCL syntax, which is covered in a separate video incidentally. So that's if you want to start getting into programming. This is adding some MRDCL syntax as a manip stage, and we'll come on to arithmetic tables later. This is adding a table to the list that's arithmetic, and this is adding a grid table. So we've got sort of 3 types of tables that we're going to do in this basic session here, looking at these 2 here particularly. So I'm going to first of all just add a standard table, and that gives me table 1. And if I was to drag, let's do a really simple table here, region into here and gender into here, it would give me that table. Now I can also get at this list by clicking on the column, scrolling up and selecting from the list here. So both of these methods, either by dragging across or by scrolling, is absolutely fine. And if I want to run that, I just click on this arrow here, although there's also a run menu here so you can run from there, but probably you'll click on this green arrow, click OK, and the table we specified will now appear in a worksheet. So I click on this and you can see I've got a cross analysis of 3 regions by the 2 genders. and the percentages are column percentages. That's what you get by default, and so 39% is 196 divided by 499, or percentaged on 499, and that gives me 39%, which is the most common way, of course, of presenting tables. So that's pretty quick. Let's look a little bit further and see what else I can do. Let's add another table now, and I'm going to use my analysis breaks now as my column. So that was that variable that had different things in it, you may recall. And let's pick some questions here. I'm going to pick question 3, question 5, and let's pick question 11. And I can just drag those into the rows. Now, when I do this, you'll see what it's done. It knows I've dragged 3 rows over here, so it's actually generated for me tables 2, 3, and 4, which means I could go into the individual table and edit that if I wanted to, but that's a very quick way of building several tables. So there was my first table where I've done region by gender, but I've got tables 2, 3, and 4 just by setting up a column and dragging 3 variables into here, or 3 questions into here, and it's made 3 tables automatically. Indeed, I could go and pick all the tables here, drag them into the rows, and I would get every single table in there analysed by, or ready for analysis by, analysis breaks. So let's click on OK and run that, or click on the Run control button, and you can now see I've got 4 tables in there, and if I click on the 3rd table, you can see that I've got a bigger table now, but I've got gender, region, and country spread across the page here, with north, central, south, and central and south combined together as well. So we built some tables now that have got analysis breaks on them. We could have ran more tables than that if we wanted to. I haven't done that here. But let's pick on one of these tables, or maybe want to copy one of these tables. So, for example, I could go into the tables and copy this table here, and I could paste it back. So I've now got a duplicate of this fifth table. But let's say on this 5th table, you see it's number 5, I want to apply a filter. So let's say I only want females in this table. I could select a filter. Now I can either do this rather like setting up my questionnaire. This is all explained in setting up the questionnaire, but I'll briefly explain it here. I can either type in what I want. You can see I type gender/2 and it pulls up the text gender is female. Or if I'm less confident to be able to specifying it through syntax, I can click on the tests, insert a test, pick the question I want, choose the value or values that I want. Well, I only want one value here, so I'm just going to pick gender female, click OK, click OK again, and you can see I've got exactly the same coming through here. Rather than typing gender or 2, it's actually just done it for me by picking it from those drop downs and selections. And it's put $1 on the front because that's what QPS does. It adds $1 to the variable. If you don't put it on there when you type it in, it'll add it for you. I can now run this, and when I open it, I can see my 4th table. You can see has the how relaxing the journey was, analysed by the standard breaks here. And if we go back to table 5, you can see it's only filtered on the 332 females. Their males have all gone, and we've got region and country appearing as the cross breaks now on this table. So that's all appearing pretty good, I would say. Now, while it's running there, if I go to the folder, I've also, you can have these tables as text files as well. So you can see I've got an Excel and a CSV file here. So let's go back, because a lot of people have in their time wanted to do this. So I can go to Global, Table Settings, Spreadsheet Options, output a text file as well as a spreadsheet. Click OK, click OK. So I've saved that in the options. Save over here, run it again. And I've still got the same tables here, but if I go to the folder where I was working, you can see now I've got my tables, tables.txt, and I've got a text version of those tables, which might be more familiar to some people who are perhaps use the older versions of QPS or prefer their tables in a text format. All right, so we've made some progress now. We've put in some tables, we put in a filter. These filters can be far more complicated, so you can have the words "and" in here, for example, and that would filter on people who are Gender 2 and Region 1. And indeed, you can make that selection through the menus by making multiple selections. So if we do that now, you'll see I've just left open the tables file there. So there's a good warning. If you leave the tables open, it won't run again. So let's just run it again now. And sure enough, I've got my tables, but table 5 now only has people who are female in region 1. So just 130 people. These regions are all empty, and the female, the male column is all empty as well. So that all appears to be working fairly well. Now let's come on to look at a grid table now. So the next thing you might want to do is a grid table. So this is a grid table, this one here with the sort of darker brown icon. So we click on that. And now I've got some rating scales here called Q12.1 to Q12.7. So if I select those, or select the first of those and put it in the rows, I don't think I quite succeeded there, let's do it again. It should make all the tables for me. So I just picked Q12_1 there. It goes right down to Q12_7. You can see it's made a table here, grid table Q12. If I run the tables again, go to table 6, and you can see I've got a summary table of the statements in my grid there, or rating scale table there, of A, B, C to G, all in one tidy table with the percentages applied. The total column's been suppressed there because each of these is effectively a total column. That's why we've got 8, 3, 1 in each column. So we've looked at grid tables, we've looked at filters. The next thing I want to take you to is format options. So let's go to, perhaps look at table 5 again. So let's just go back to my tables. Let's run these once more. Question 5 I meant. So there's question 5. So here's some tables, and you can see at the bottom here, not given is 0%. So maybe I want to suppress the rows that are 0. We do that by choosing format options. Now, if we go to this question, I can either type in the format options if I know what they are, or I can select them from menus again. So, for example, I know blank row suppression is BRS, so I can just type that in if I want to. If I can't remember that, I can click on the Formats button and I get a list. Now, you'll see over here, there's common text formats that you want and all the text formats. There are a lot of formats in the QPSMR Companion. There's something like 200 odd of them. Now, these are the most common ones that you want to use. So I suggest sticking with these and only using this for any special circumstances. So let's pick up BRS. So there it is. And I want to turn it on. So it's off by default. So all format options have defaults. And if I turn it on, it will mean that I now get BRS on this table. Now, there's 3 types of format options that you have. There's ones that are true and false, like BRS here. There's ones that take a value like DPR. So let's take DPR. That's the decimal places percentages. Now, by default, you get no decimal places, but maybe I want 1 decimal place. You see I can set it as the default setting here if I want to, but I just want it for the one table here. So I'm not clicking that button, so I'm clicking 1. And now I've got 2 format options, BRS and DPR1. Now, the other one I'm going to use is the other type of format option, which is by default you get a dash for 0 on tables, but I actually want to put a 0 when it's 0. Now that's not on the standard list, so I have to go to all formats, and there's the one I want, CAS. You can see this is a very long list now. I'm just scrolling up and down it at full speed, but I want CAS. The default for that is dash. I want to change it to 0, So now I'm applying 3 formats just to this one table. I've made none of them a default, so I've just applied them to this table. So I'm going to suppress that blank row, which had 0 in it. I'm going to change any zeros in my table to a 0 rather than a dash, and I'm getting 1 decimal place. So let's run this now. Save our work first, run it, and open up the table 3. And sure enough, now if we look at our tables, that not given has gone away from the table. We're getting 1 decimal place for each of the cells here. That 0 in there is not a dash anymore, it's appearing as a 0. And that will also be true of the text tables that we can produce. So here they are in the text file. There we go, we've got dashes in here now, table 3, sorry. Haven't gone far enough, so there we are, we've got a 0 in there now. There's another format option for the percentage to be a dash as well, but in a spreadsheet you do get 0 consistently because dash has a different meaning, if you like, in an Excel worksheet, so it only applies to the text file, that particular setting. Now I won't be going through those format options in huge detail because, as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. So they cover things like percentaging, whether you suppress blank rows, blank columns, blank tables, how many decimal places you see, what statistical options you produce, so where you've got values associated with questions or variables. You can choose whether you have things like standard deviation, standard error, error variance, significance testing, a real whole host of things that control all the things that you can do on QPSMR Companion tables. All right, so we've looked at those two types of tables, the standard tables and the grid tables. You'll see here that you've got the ability to actually input some syntax. That is covered in a separate table. Let's just have a look at a couple of more things now while we're here. You've seen at the bottom here there's a quantity weight value. So this actually weights the table, not by target or rim weighting. We do have a separate video that explains the difference between volumetric or quantity weighting, which is what we have here, and target weighting, which is either traditional interlocking cell target weighting or rim weighting. That's covered in a completely separate video which goes through that in great detail, both the principles and how to use it in the QPSMR Companion. And what we're going to do here now is just apply a quantity weight to this. Now the one table we've got is question 6, is the number of employees, so I'm going to drag that into here. Now what that will do is produce this table for me here, but it'll be incremented by the number of employees they got. So if they've got 100 employees, it'll count as 100 times. If they've got 200, it'll count 200 times. And consequently, my table will be in terms of employees rather than respondents. So we've got a warning that we've got some big figures there. And you can see now that I've weighted these tables by employees, we now have a total from 831 respondents. We have 226,800 employees, and the percentages are now based on employees, not on respondents any longer. So that's what quantity weighting is. Now, if you have a lot of tables, one thing that you might want to do is only run one table. So if you want to do that, let's say we just want to run this table here. We don't say we've got 100 or 200 or even 1,000 tables in here. We only want to run table 1. We can click on this icon here, and this will just produce the table that we're highlighting. So we're just getting back now to region versus gender, and we've got that table only rather than running the whole volume. And now that won't matter on a small project, but on a large project where you've got a lot of tables with a lot of perhaps respondents, that perhaps might save you some time when you're running your tables. So that's taken you through the basics of producing tables in the QPSMR Companion. There is another video that covers some of the more advanced things, including arithmetic tables. Before I go, I'm going to just show you one more technique that you have for producing grid tables that produces something slightly different. So I'm going to quit this temporarily. So now we're going to make a grid variable and use that in analysis, because I think this is another way of working which is quite neat. So we're picking the 7 entries that make up this rating or series of rating statements here. I'm going to insert a grid variable. You can see now it's put them down as sort of a list of 7. Click exit, and now we have 2 grid variables that have been built. Let me save that. I'm now going back to tables. I'm going to call this run grid table. Specify that I want a grid table, and all I need to do now to get that summary table is drag that into the rows. There it goes, and run it. Now the results here are going to be slightly different, so if we click through to get the tables, you can see the bases are different. They were 831 for every statement this time. For this particular way of doing it, each of the columns is based on the number of people that answered. So only 70 people answered the speed of booking, 823 of our sample answered this, and only, as you see along here, the weather, only 363. So it's a slightly different grid type table, but it is another way of working and building up your grid variables. Now you can edit that so that you get all people in every column if you want to, but by default it will base it on people who answer each of those columns, which is different from the grid table we had just now. So I hope this video has been useful to you. Thank you for joining me. There is another video that looks at slightly more advanced tables using arithmetic tables and manip, so please join me for that if you'd like to see that. You'll find those in the QPSMR Companion Going Deeper series. Thank you.